Hello, folks. Scott Guile from McMillan. We will get to Amanda momentarily. Thank you so much for your time and interest today. I just want to review quickly. I know not everyone uses GoToWebinar. It's your typical screen share software, but you should have a orange arrow in the right hand corner of your screen. If you click on that arrow, you should see what is being shown here. You should see an audio option. You should see a questions option. You can click on that chevron or that arrow to the left of those to get additional options. So if you want to change your audio source, if you click on the left arrow to audio, you will have options there. If you click on the chevron for questions, you'll have the ability to send us questions, which we want you to do. So please do that. If you want to be able to work with the questions option a little easier, this square to the right of the questions will pop it into the middle of your screen, and it's easier to type in and to see if you pop it into the middle of your screen. So a little bit about GoToWebinar. Additionally, if for whatever reason you lose the visual at any point in time, it may be because it got minimized. In the bottom of your screen, and what a lot of people sometimes call the tray, there will be a blue flower icon, or if you're on a Mac, apparently it is an orange flower icon, same shape. Clicking that maximizes and minimizes the presentation. It won't close anything, so don't be afraid to click that if you've lost the presentation or if you want to minimize this. We're thrilled to have Amanda with us today. She's got a PhD in Gen Chem and teaches interdisciplinary chem courses, including chemistry of art, chemistry of everyday life, the ever popular forensic chemistry, I'm sure, from everyone watching SVU. Background scientific analysis of art, researching public murals and paintings, and likes to bring unique examples into her class, which is at Valencia College in Orlando, Florida. So Amanda's been awesome to work with, and I am going to pass it over to her right now.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. We are basically going to talk about the soft side of education. You might have noticed your students have changed a little bit from maybe the beginning of your teaching career. So I'm going to talk about how can we get students to really get to that adulting stage in life when they're coming into your classroom. So what I have seen is that probably in the last 6 to 7 years, I've seen my email inbox explode with the number of excuses I get, whether it's students requesting extensions or sending apologies that they missed a deadline, or asking for a bonus request because they just expect bonus work to be available, maybe based on their high school experience. The other thing I've seen is that their work quality has gone a little down. So for them, it's not that they aren't trying. I do want to get that out first off. They are completely trying, but what they are doing is that they aren't quite adept at showing their work anymore with having so many things online or so many multiple choice quizzes and tests. So they don't have quite that critical thinking that they need to think about what they need to do, execute that plan, and then show you as the professor what they did. Similar things I've seen with lab reports and papers that I asked them to write. They can't quite figure out the stages of working with something. So they can't understand or give me an outline, and then go from the outline to doing the research and then giving me a good first draft and then a final draft, etc. And what I've narrowed down my beliefs as to what's causing this is a lack of soft skills. These are things that we might have learned on ourselves going through school. How do you write down deadlines from a board? How do you interpret what's important that the teacher is saying, but may not have sent home or written on the board itself? Students nowadays are used to an email, a post on Canvas, or whatever your learning management system is. And if it's not an email, it's a reminder from the homework platform. And so they've gotten used to not having to know when something's due because there's always a digital reminder to do so. So these are things that we're working on in my classroom. So other things that have popped up, and again, some of this is colloquial evidence for my students, is that they have less exposure to textbooks. They may not have had a hard textbook in over 4 or 5 years. And if they did have a textbook, it might have been an ebook or just a packet of information self-selected by the professor so that they don't have the ability to just go to the next chapter or read back to get a little bit more background information from another chapter. So because they don't have that available to them, they aren't quite skilled in getting the information. Maybe how do they find and use the key terms? Because in that packet of information, it's hyper-focused. They have that key term already outlined for them or underlined. They don't know quite how to use a chapter and how it's built up with a little bit of pre-information, here's some other information, and they build up towards the big stuff. They might also not know how to go back and restudy that. So I sometimes let students, when I know when we start the first day of class, I'm like, read like a kindergartner. Look at the pictures, read the example problems, and then come to class. I don't expect them to read the book first thing, but I want them to be familiar with it. So teaching them that's okay. You don't have to read it word for word before you come to class is one thing they haven't thought about. The other thing, as I mentioned a little bit on the previous slide, is workload. That due date in a high school or even through all of K through 12 is often hyper-regulated. Teachers might say, okay, your math homework's due on Monday, your English homework's due on Tuesday, your history's on Wednesday. And so they don't really have much agency or control over when things are due and have to make time in their schedules to do everything at once. So when they get to college, where we as professors don't talk to each other, we don't know that their math professor is giving something on the same day that a massive English essay is due. They need to figure out how to complete tasks on their own timelines effectively and efficiently. So here are the soft skills of the 21st century that I found, and the ones in bold are the ones I'll talk about today. But taking a look at this list, you might be nodding to yourselves at home or wherever you're watching this saying, yes, I've noticed my students need this, or they're lacking in initiative. If they, in initiative, I mean, if they identify themselves as having problems, do they have the initiative to reach out to you or to their tutors or to a classmate to start help? Accountability. If they miss something, do they own up to the fact that they missed it, or do they blame you on having such a busy schedule, or asking you too much work? Can they communicate both in written and verbal form? Is it appropriate and timely? So for example, I've now set up boundaries. I said, if you respond to me about a missed deadline within 48 hours of the deadline, I'll consider your request. But after 48 hours, it's a no. And so that boundary that I set for my students has actually made our communication much more timely and appropriate. So here are the goals I set in my curriculum. I want to build their soft skills so that they can become, a gainfully employed adult, or an adult who can move through the rest of their academic career with ease. So I want to build and analyze their study habits. This means that I have to expose them to what study habits are available and have them reflect upon what works for them. Talk about planning. How do they outline their week, outline their month, outline their semester? Communication, again, with myself and their other professors versus their colleagues, their fellow students. Perseverance. This is a key in chemistry where I teach. Often students come in and they're the high learners. They aren't used to failure. So when they come in and they may not have done well on the first quiz or the first test, their instinct is to shut down or just withdraw from the course. So explaining to students that there is something to be said about perseverance, about failing or struggling a little bit, but continuing on and improving. Again, that initiative I talked about on the previous stage of when do you look for help, their decision-making process. Do you go to that party? Do you watch Netflix for hours? Or do you work a little bit on your homework every day? The self-confidence to know that they can do something. And also the agency. This is something that I've added in. And I honestly cannot tell you where I found it. I know maybe I was first or second year teacher, and someone said it's okay to give a pass every so often. So I call this the dog ate my homework. This is the idea that I'm expecting my students, they're going to mess up. There's going to be an emergency. They might have jury duty. They might have an unknown illness or a family emergency. They just might have to been called into work somehow. And I just say, this is your dog ate your homework. You have up to 7 days to turn in this one assignment, no penalty. I don't even need to know why. And so my students fill out the form and they say, here's the assignment I want extended. And I say, okay, great. There's no stress. There's no guilt over using the dog ate my homework. And so students have actually been much more responsible about their deadlines, knowing that they only have one of these. I think by giving them a limit, they know how far they can push, but then once they've reached that limit, they do the rest of their work themselves. So having that agency given to students on when they can have that pass or extension has really helped my classroom be set up and have them behave in a more adult manner. So here are the strategies that I have. Some of these are only since the pandemic. So this is something that I started in 2020, was arranging my office hours so that they fit students' schedules and student behaviors. So I have a lot more evening office hours than I ever did previously in my career. And I've also created more problem-solving sessions. On my learning management platform, I created study modules. And when I'm in person with my students or online in a live class, I give in-class study tips. So for example, I'll explain that personally, I never found note cards useful in chemistry, but problem solving is very useful. Looking at homework problems again has been very useful. And so it gives the students a chance to chip in with what they found useful for themselves. And that peer-to-peer learning and sharing of information has been great. The number 3 tip has been a godsend in the past year. I started using these in fall of 2020 and then really using them to the best of my ability in this past year, in spring 2021 and summer. And these are the student self-reflections by Achieve Innovation Labs. This is the idea that I give 5 surveys in a semester, and it asks students to identify their goals, and it checks in periodically with their habits. And I'll talk a little bit more about this throughout the rest of the presentation. And the final thing is academic affirmations. This is giving students a term or a phrase that they can say to themselves or remind themselves that they're worth it, that they can do it, and they can get through the semester, strong. So office hours. Again, choose office hours when your students are available. This doesn't mean I expect you to have office hours 10 to midnight every night, but maybe once a week have an evening office hour. Other things is office hours right after class is a great thing. And by having them when students are making it, you're allowing students the time to use them versus being an unattended office hour. But the other thing I've done, going back to giving guidance to help them move towards adulthood, is that I set up requests. I say a student must attempt the problem they're going to discuss with me before they talk about it in office hours, and they have to show me their work. Not only does this give guidance on what we're going to talk about during office hours, but it helps us, myself and the student, make the most of their time. So, and when they're successful becoming office hours, they're more likely to be repeat customers, repeat attendees. The other thing I do is problem solving. It's often very hard to go from just reading lecture and then going straight to homework. There needs to be a chance for students to explore and do the problems. So instead of having all lecture all week, I have 1 lecture day and 1 problem solving day. And we have an optional tutoring day on another day of the week. So we're practicing those bridging questions. And I know this is a little math and chemistry focus right here, but you can also have bridging, assignments if you're in English or history. So you introduce the topic, and then you often have an assignment at the end. Well, for these problem solving or entangled learning sessions, these are the ones that are medium, a little bit harder. They're stretching beyond that initial concept, but not quite towards mastery. So giving a chance to explore in a safe and supported environment. Other things, if you're teaching online, you probably all have figured this out on your own, but if not, screen annotation has been a great tool. One thing, it slows you down as a professor and gives students a chance to write down things from your screen. But also when you write on the screen, you're telling your students again that it's important to you that they know how to do this part. So study skills. This is one of the areas that we're noticing a weakness. They're coming in exhibiting fewer and fewer study skills. And it's, again, they're not trying. It's that they don't know how quite to do it effectively. So they may wait all the way to the end of the week and panic and do 5 to 6 hours of work in one day instead of doing maybe 20 to 30 minutes every day or an hour every day. So taking things in small chunks. How do you take notes? Instead of just relying on a PowerPoint being available online, can you take notes? Can you take small chunks of that information and convert it into your own language? Instead of just listening or watching lecture, interacting with a lecture. So one thing I tried to do is remind them that writing down physically, so instead of just typing, but actually physically writing down your notes, it helps create a neural pathway for that information to stay more embedded in your brain than just listening. So it helps them when it comes to recall for a quiz or a test. I also say it's okay that they write in shorthand. So I'm not even sure this class is still available, but I took a class in high school in shorthand, and that's how I survived college. I was able to take down my professor's words very quickly and effectively because I use not only legal shorthand, but my own version of shorthand, in symbols. So saying it's okay to put those symbols in, you don't have to write down word for word what's on the PowerPoint or what I say out loud. And finally, practice, practice, practice when it comes either to problems or designing your first drafts or things like that for any assignment we have. To assist with this, especially when a student can't find me because I'm not available 24/7, is that I created a study module. In the study module, I used outside resources from well-known colleges and also tips from my college and tips that I created myself. There's also a study session sign up for students to make their own study groups. This was very important during the pandemic when we weren't on campus. So another thing I did in that helpful information for myself is I said, where can you find me? I also say, here's my office hours on Zoom. I give them the options for where they can find me and also remind them about the tools that are available at my college. Other things I give is helpful hints about study habits and things like that. Then I asked at the end of the first semester I made this available is what did they find most useful? I don't want to keep overburdening their page with too much information if it wasn't useful to them. So what they found most useful, it seemed like, were the tips guided toward their subject, so for chemistry or science. But they also found most useful in the green is my personal document. And from the responses I got where I asked someone to expand on their answers, they just appreciated that I put the time in to make it personal, that I put the time in to give some of myself to them. So I'm not just this random person in the front of the class. I'm someone who showed that I cared, showed that I wanted them to succeed. And they said just that personal touch made them feel more inspired to do well, that I believed in them because I knew they had the ability to do it. So one thing I do want you to take away from this slide or this module is try and put a little bit of yourself in to some of the advice you might be giving, whether it's explaining like how well you did in your freshman year or how well you did in your science classes. Having that humanizing touch has been really useful to me to share myself with my students. And now going back to how do we get them towards adulting, how to email properly and things like that. My biggest help has been the self-reflection modules and the Achieve Innovation Labs. And so in the first survey, they're asked to reflect on what they want to achieve by the end of the semester. They're asked to identify their goals, whether it's content knowledge or a specific grade. Then they're asked to assess how will they manage their time. Will they spend a couple hours a day? Will they spend just a chunk of it on Saturdays? And then they are introduced into and asked to identify what learning strategies they might use for the semester. And later on, how do they change their learning strategies once they identify something that didn't work for them? And that last bullet point, identifying what has worked and has not worked for them, has been incredibly important. I've often told my students that I know they're working hard. And sometimes they work so hard, they'll dig to China to find the answer. But the answer wasn't all the way down in China. It was 5 feet to the left, and it was just a foot down. And so I'm also asking them to reflect on when is it okay to stop and ask for help. So when do you stop? So I actually give them the guidance. I'm like, try it once. If you don't get it, try it again, making sure you're reading more information, and try it a third time. If by the third time it's not coming to you, reach out to me, reach out to a tutor, or reach out to a classmate. So reach out for that third person. And so that has helped them use their time more effectively. And because they're using their time more effectively, they're not getting as frustrated with the material or the homework. So in the Achieve Innovation Labs, here are some things that you might see. For example, they give it to us in several categories. And one of the categories is space it out, where again, chunking out time so you can do your studying a little bit. And so when I introduce this in the semester, most students know that they should be spacing out their study. They may not know why we recommend it. And so giving time to explain why this could be good practice or study habit has helped more students do it. Other things that they didn't quite know, and they let me know by the end of the semester what they appreciated the most, was maybe summarizing the main point of their notes. Again, a lot of us as teachers, we're good at studying. We may not think that someone needs to know that it's good to summarize your notes, but for some students, they've never been taught to do so. So just explaining how you would study in a class and then sharing these Innovation Lab surveys could really help improve their study habits. So one thing that the report sheets come back as are in this document where I can see at the bottom all the different report sheets through the semester, but it also gives me the summary through time. So you might see that their confidence went up slightly towards the end of the semester where they get a little stressed, but I want you to focus on the hours per week, where they started out with a high amount of time on my class for this, and then they dropped down. This explained as a 4 credit hour class. We are expecting them to take about 6 to 12 hours outside of class time to study, just based on the credit hours. And so what I see is that 7.5 and 9 hour in the checkpoint 3 and 4 is not that they got lazy. They finally learned how to study effectively. And that's really one of the most important things I've seen by using these surveys. The students are identifying their best habits, and therefore they're able to apply them and come out of the semester feeling stronger and more engaged with their work. Because of this, in science, again, it's a little hard in chemistry. Sometimes we get a lot of students that say, your tests were too hard, or you made us do too much. I have not had those emails in the 3 semesters that I've started using the self-reflection surveys. Instead, I'm getting, I recognize that I didn't study well enough or didn't take enough time to study, but I'll improve on for the next one. So it's taking off the focus on the professors to blame and instead saying, I recognize that it was my attitude, my habits that might need to blame, but I could change them and still do well. And like, it's so rewarding to hear that. One, it lessens my stress because it's stressful when a student doesn't do well. As a professor, I still want everyone to do well. So when someone doesn't, it still hurts, even though I know we're supposed to not be as attached to our students that way, but it still hurts when they don't succeed. So giving them a tool so they can do their absolute best, whatever their best is, has been very heartwarming for me. But looking a little bit into these checkpoints, here's what you might see. I prefer this view. It's a student view that my students are anonymous. All I see is that code on the left. And instead, I get to scroll through the whole spreadsheet and they tell me what challenges they've had as identified in the survey. And they might tell me a little bit more, like they've been diagnosed with anxiety, they had a health issue. And I've always said, I let them know it's anonymous. And I found that, and I told them this in probably the second semester I started using these, is I told them this so they could be more open. And they were more open once they understood that they had anonymity. But if someone prefers as a professor not to have anonymity, you do have the achieve view, where instead I can go in just like you would look at the homework and look at what they wrote for their homework. I could do the same things for the survey. So in this particular, and I did this after the semester because again, I've promised my students to uphold their anonymity when going through the course. I didn't want it to affect my interpretation of their work or anything like that. So I said, for example, this one, this particular student, she had emailed me about her anxiety and she said, I'd like it if you look at my survey. And that's the other thing I allow my students to tell me. I said, if you ever want me to read your survey with your identity in mind, please email me and I'll go and look at your survey. So if there's ever something that they want me to respond to, I can then comment right directly on their survey or just email them back or talk to them in office hours. This has been a wonderful tool for not only having students, again, reach out when they need to, identify when they need to reach out, but it also helps me give empathy in a timely and effective manner. I once had a student, before I started using the surveys, they had cancer, they were going through chemo, and I didn't know because, again, we're online, until the last week of the semester, where they're like, I'm so sorry, I'm not doing well. I've been in chemo for the third time this semester. And I wanted to explain, like, you don't have to identify, but you could always say you had a health issue and you need a little bit more time on an assignment. So reaching out and letting my students know that I'm available to give those extensions has also been something that I've grown with as I've used these surveys, is again, explaining to my students what I'm willing to do for them and maybe also explaining my limits. So on the self-reflection surveys, I do want to point you to the graph real quick. The students in the first survey are asked to identify what grade they want at the beginning of the semester. And 94% of my students over 2 semesters, I didn't actually give this survey in the first semester, I used the Achieve Innovation Lab surveys. 94% reported that they were extremely to slightly confident that they would meet or exceed their goal, and only 3 of them were not confident. But if you see the darker green, that is my summer students. By the time I was summer 2021, I knew how to use these surveys more effectively for my teaching. And so I've seen that I've been able to improve my responses to the surveys so that my students have also improved how they are able to adapt after each survey. So the reflection of their journey has improved their adult status. They can reflect on their own actions. They can change how they communicate with me and with others, and they can modify their thoughts on who they think is responsible for their grade. Again, it's that idea of I earned a grade versus my professor gave me a grade, or I earned that A or F versus my professor, ruined me because I gave her an F, or, my professor gave me an A because she's nice. So taking back ownership of their grades. So just a few things before we kind of wrap up here. I just want to show you kind of the questions that they see on the Space It Out strategies, another learning habit. These are things like start assignments early, study a little bit out, and you'll see that some of them are really useful for students and some of them aren't. So when I share this with my students in the following semester, it's to tell them that not all of you will study the same. Not all of you will find each tool useful. We're just trying to find the tool that works for you. Similarly, a challenge yourself. And this one was more interesting. This one, students who are in my Chem 1 class, so younger students, this is a result from them. They really didn't quite like the challenge yourself. They weren't ready for this study strategy. But in Chem 2, a second semester course, this was actually a more popular topic. So again, you'll also edit this based on the course you're teaching. And the final thing I added in starting in the spring was academic affirmations. Just hopefully to use this as a tool as students face more stress or had that semester fatigue. Really wanted to get that growth mindset going of whatever they're facing, whatever they're doing can help build them into becoming a better and stronger adult. So again, asked manually to write it down because of that brain, that neural connection, and asked to physically record it, not just have it written on a computer or typed somewhere. So one, there was that evidence, as we said, the neural pathways, but also I wanted it somewhere that they could see it daily if they wanted to. So at the end of the semester, the number one affirmation that students said they liked to use repeatedly was, I have the power to learn and understand everything. But on the side, there were some other ones. So this is from my spring 2021 class. In my summer 2021 class, it was the third one we see. I believe in, have trust in, and have confidence in myself. The only thing students replied to me about the affirmations that they didn't like is that I didn't remind them to use them more frequently. So again, adjusting to myself to fit my course, I also remind them about the affirmations more frequently than I did in the previous semester, just to remind students that they're available to them. So towards future student success, I am so appreciative that the surveys are available. It not only helps me learn more about my students, but it helps me learn about how students are today learning in the university environment. Because what I went to school as, the internet was available, but it wasn't all social media all the time. There weren't cell phones all the time. So I understand that my university experience is different than theirs. So I get to see what their background is, how they're going through daily life in a way that's personalized, but still has that anonymity. I gave them the tools to trust themselves and myself, and they can self-analyze and reflect on what they're doing and how they can improve their scores or improve their experience in my class. One thing I've learned to do is be open and willing to listen and then jump in when I need to, but also I had to learn when to step away, to say, actually, this is, you've gone past my, my 48-hour deadline for an extension request, and I just say no. And so students learn my limits as well to fit within that scale. And then the last thing as a teacher tip is, again, giving that space and time for active learning and problem solving so you can help students build that critical thinking skill, but also help them heightened awareness maybe about their time management, because you're expressing to them during that time, how long should something take in order to do it effectively. Anyways, that's what I have for you today. And I appreciate you giving me your time for the day. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Amanda. We're going to get to questions in a moment. We actually do have one already queued up. I just want to show very quickly, one of the questions was about the goal setting and reflection surveys. And I just want to show people very quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. This is our Achieve platform, and it's got some tabs over here on the side. Some of you may be familiar with it, some may not. One of the tabs is reports. Under the reports tab, you get a lot of analytics you can use, but that's not what this is about. I think they're very cool. But under Innovation Lab, that is where the goal setting and reflection surveys are explained. It really, as Amanda said, it allows them to take some responsibility, some agency in ownership of their own studying and their own work. And how do they work? There are actually a series of 5 surveys. The first intro survey asks questions like, what are you hoping to learn in this class? Are there any skills you're hoping to walk away with? On average, how many hours do you expect to spend outside of lecture? What makes you confident or doubtful in your ability to do well? And then the follow-up surveys are checking their progress on these goals. Some instructors have used all 5, some have used the intro and a combination of a couple of them. The data that we got from Amanda on her class was an eye-opener for us. The students were really using these and really liking these, and that was a big deal to us. And then we've gotten similar feedback from people. One of the big, I think, pluses for instructors, and these are easily found in the beginning of the TOC here and in the course content area if you've set it up, but they're very easy to assign. You literally just would click on one of these things, add it to your course and assign. I'm not going to go through the assignment path, but basically it's a set it and forget it. And almost, so obviously you probably want to look at the reports that you get, I think ideally, But to assign them, you don't have to change anything you're doing in the class. You just assign the survey to the students and they take it. It
Yeah, I
doesn't
did
require.
forget to add one thing of like when you should assign them. It is mentioned in the instructor guide, but how I use them is I use them after the first quiz. So I have the intro at the beginning of the semester, checkpoint 1 after the first quiz, checkpoint 2 after the first exam, and then I space out the remaining number 3 and 4, and then the 5th one I do between kind of right before their last exam of the semester, before they get to their final. So the last in semester exam, and it's done well. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. The bottom
That's
line,
okay.
we've been
Yeah.
really encouraged by not just Amanda's feedback, by overall feedback and instructors who have used these. It's a simple and effective tool that gets the class to understand what they're doing, when they're doing it, what they should be doing. And the number of students that Amanda has surveyed that said they've changed their behavior as a result of taking these is staggering. The first one she sent us, 62 of 63 students in her class said they changed their study behavior as a result. And when you see data like that in our industry, it's an eye opener. But let's get to the questions. Thank you for taking a look at that with us. And it's now time to get to the questions. And I know I have at least one in here. I've seen others coming in. I will take them in the order in which they came in. Okay, 1 second. Access the recording, yes. Okay, first one. Do you encourage handwritten notes over computer?
I personally do, and I think this is because of the science part of it. I expect them to be able to show their work on a quiz or a test. And I found that the students who write their notes during the class and take notes directly from the board or from the screencast have better recall when it comes to a quizzing or testing scenario. So they're quicker at accessing that material, so they're not as stressed during the actual quiz or test. So I don't require it, but I highly encourage it.
A lot of questions about how to access the surveys. I had shown how to achieve. If you don't have access to achieve, on the follow-up email we send out, you can request access. If you have a relationship with your rep, you can request access. If you just want to hit us back with an email, you can request access. If you're going to request access, please tell us for which course. So, I'm a chemistry teacher teaching organic chem or gen chem, or I'm a biologist teaching it. Just let us know that so we can send you the appropriate product.
Yeah.
Next question for Amanda. Sorry, I may have missed it, had to step away. Did you create the academic affirmations or do you have a reference/citation?
I don't have a reference citation. I got like 2 ideas, I want to say, from a document, and I think I referenced it on a previous, let me see if I put it on this slide. But essentially what I did is Pinterest, which is not a great reference tool, but there are a lot of K through 12 affirmations, and I edited them slightly to make them more college efficient. You're more than welcome to copy them. And if I find my original, sorry, it's on a different presentation. I guess I had the 2 that I did find, but I'll send that reference out to Scott, and that way, if anyone wants them, they can find them.
And we're going to put this recording and some other materials on our community, and we'll put anything we think is going to be useful along with it on the community site, which people can all access.
Yeah. And another thing I did is I asked students to write their own. And so some students did write their own, and I included them the next semester. Because again, I want it to be most effective for them. It's not my tool. It's something that should help them. So I wanted it, in their own language.
Next question. It's great to see how engaged students were with the self-reflection surveys. How do students perceive their need to learn soft skills? What skills did they find the most helpful? So sort of a 2-parter. Did they perceive their need? How did they perceive their need? And if they had, or when they did, which were most helpful?
So I guess this is a good question. I haven't quite approached it that way. This was more, when I did this as a introduction to my class, it was more for study skills. So I didn't really enhance it as soft skills. But from the feedback I get with not only the self-reflection surveys, but the survey I give at the end of the semester to assess how the students liked the surveys, the Achieve Innovation Lab surveys, the feedback I get is they appreciated the time management skills. They appreciated the confidence building that they got and the reflection. As I mentioned, students, especially my students, they're very busy with outside work. Maybe they have families and then school. So they appreciated the time savings they got by analyzing their habits and also analyzing what saved them the best time, but gave them the maximum potential for a good grade.
Thank you.
Mhm.
You mentioned the importance of letting the students know that you have heard their comments. When you made a change in practice based on their feedback, do you explicitly let the class know?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say, oh, I read in checkpoint 2, 2 or 3 of your classmates mentioned, like, for example, I have an optional class this semester that I teach at 10 a.m. and 2 students mentioned they wanted it at 11. So I emailed them. I'm like, I'm more than happy to move it to 11. Here's a survey to say, because I teach to the majority of the class. I'm like, how many people want that change? But that's a pretty big change. But for other times, I would say, hey, I got some feedback that you're still struggling with this concept. We're going to do a couple extra problems today based on the feedback from the surveys that I got. So those are more, for the checkpoints after a quiz or a test, that where a student might say, I still struggle with enthalpy, or I still struggle with this particular equation. And so we'll do a couple practice, problems on that the next class session.
Um, I'm going to give you access because this question is actually asking you to show something. So I'm going to pass it back over to you. And the question is, could you show the challenge yourself questions again?
Sure. Just 1 second. Oh, so on this slide, they're highlighted by the explanation graphic. So explain each concept to a friend out loud. If I can't explain it, then I don't know it, is the rest of that point.
By the way, if people are seeing a split screen with the camera and the slide, you can drag that bar to make the slide bigger. So
or here, I can have my camera. It's no big deal. Let me get rid of that.
Okay. And if you had your camera, it makes it full screen. I know that I can't read anything anymore without cheaters. So getting old.
Okay. So again, another one, the purple one, is attempt problems without looking at my notes or other help first. And then the rest of it's going to be like on a quiz or a test, is the rest of that hidden space. The blue is make or take practice test and time myself as if it's a real test. Green, create flashcards. The act of creating them is a study tool. And again, as I mentioned in science, myself and my students, we've all found that flashcards don't work in chemistry, but they actually use this in biology and they found it really useful. So not only are we influencing the class I teach, it influences the other class they have available. Then yellow, shuffle the topics I'm studying, a technique called interleaved learning. And so I actually can't remember the end of this one, but I think it's so when they shuffle the concepts, they're, basically they're not memorizing a text page, they're learning a concept. So it's less memorization, more applied knowledge.
Okay, and there's one more. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say the last one, create concepts maps to understand the relationships between concepts I'm learning, and applied techniques, I believe, is the end of that one.
Thank you. There's one more question, which I'll address, and if there's nothing else, we'll end. But if you have another question, you got a little window here to get it in. Someone asked, I'm not a Macmillan adopter. How can I use these without using a Macmillan book? At this point, you can't. However, I've been thinking a lot, and I think our dev people have been thinking a lot. We have a number of tools, including this one, that are sort of applicable across disciplines. And I would not be surprised that at one point we don't sort of bundle those together for general student use, even without the textbook association. I mean, technically, if we sampled this to you and you wanted to print out the surveys, you could run them that way. Obviously, the students won't be able to log in and take them online without access to the system, and you won't have access to the reports, but you could use the surveys themselves as handouts. Not quite as effective, I wouldn't imagine, but it's something you could do by saying, and we give anyone that wants access who's teaching access to the system. Looks like we had one more question come in. Let me get to the bottom here. Okay, it was just a comment. Love the challenge yourself questions. Thank you. I think, wait, oh, all right, one more. Since it's week 6, is it too late to begin using the surveys? And what if some students don't have the textbook?
So no, I started using them in the fall because I'm going to be honest, fall 2020, we all know how busy that was. And I knew the surveys were available, but I just didn't want to learn a new technique at the beginning of the semester. So I only did 3 surveys the first semester, and I started about week 5 or 6. And for me, the reason I started using them is because with the online switch, it was drastically evident that studying needed to be more self-guided because I wasn't seeing them in person. I couldn't look over the shoulder to see their work. in the classroom. And so that's where I use these tools. So it definitely is very useful no matter when you implement them in the semester. And then they're not technically tied to an ebook. So like none of the questions I ask or are asked in the learning surveys are tied to concepts that I teach. They're just tied to studying. And you can add questions. I have added questions before, like in a checkpoint saying, how did you like, so if I edited maybe my teaching style, I said, how did you like this class versus another class? And I could do that. I can edit the surveys on the fly and get it pushed out with the Achieve Innovation Lab.
Sorry, I'm muted. The surveys are done as quizzes, as assessments in our system. And all the assessments that we do, except our adaptive quizzing, are it can be fully edited by the instructor. So yes, you can definitely access the surveys and edit the surveys that way. People are asking how to request access to the surveys. I see Becky has answered that. We're happy to give access to Achieve to anybody who requests it, who's an instructor. Again, we will put that link in our follow-up, or you can hit us back with an email. You got an email from us to invite you here, so you should have our contact. You just need to let us know which course, which discipline, which course, so we can send you the right product. And the way to access that, again, I'll show it one more time. Gotta right click. I'll show one more time how to access the surveys within Achieve. They are on the reports tab, if you will. Okay, 1 second. For some reason, I'm not able to escape out of my slides right now. Not sure why. Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry about that. So this is the Achieve system. This is what it looks like for all of our full course solutions. So this is a similar navigation. There are tabs over here on the left. Under reports, Innovation Lab will be information about the surveys. And then under resources, right at the very top of the table of contents, if you click on goal setting and reflection surveys, it brings them all up. You can open up any of them, you can edit them, you can look at them, you can assign them, etc. But if you're just looking to look at them, you can print them out and give them to your class. I know some people are saying they don't have access to this. We'd like you to be able to use them. Obviously, to use them online and to access the reports, it does require access to Achieve. And we're trying to find more and more ways to make it affordable with, sans ebook versions, things like that. And we'll continue to do that. And we may someday have a product that it encompasses some of these tools without course content. I mean, it's not imminent, but it's entirely possible. That's what Innovation Lab is sort of all about in some ways. Innovation Lab is not just meant to be about these particular surveys. That happens to be one of their projects, and it's obviously it's gone very well because we've had a lot of use of it. I think that's the end of our questions. It is the end of our questions. Thank you guys for your time, your attention, your awesome questions. You will get a recording of this. For people who are asking about a certificate, yes, you will get a certificate. And if you want access to Achieve subsequent to getting the email with the recording, or even before then, please let us know and we will absolutely do so. There may be one more question. Launchpad does not allow you to access Achieve, but you email Elaine, email us directly and we'll figure this out. Launchpad, we're transitioning from Launchpad to Achieve in many course areas. If you're a Launchpad user, let's see what we can figure out to, if you want to use these. Email us. We'll try to figure something out. Thank you again, guys. Appreciate
thank
your
you,
time.
everyone.
And have a wonderful rest of your week.